Hello, everybody. What is up? It's me, your favorite son, back with another episode of TGG. It's a special episode. We're a little bit early today. We have a special guest here as well. But first, as always, with me is my co-host Evan Prince. And the reason for the special episode is because we have a special guest. We have Ross from Accursed Farms here to hang out with us today. Thank you for joining us, by the way.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. If you don't know, Ross is the man behind Accursed Farms, his YouTube channel, but recently has sort of entered the spotlight, so to speak, for heading the European Citizens Initiative Stop Killing Games, which we talked about on last week's episode. Before we get into things, before we get into the interview and stuff, how have you been doing since like this has all sort of gone big, since this is all sort of blown up? I'm sure it's been kind of a hectic couple weeks.
More than a couple weeks. I mean, the Citizens Initiative is kind of like this entire campaign led to several things. So it's been more like, 2/3 of the year that's been taking over my life on this, but it's drawing to a close. I am just dying for more free time. That's how I feel about it. So.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm sure it's a lot of work. Have you been like able to just like chill and play some games or anything like that? Or has it just been all go, go, go?
There were moments I could, and then they would kind of go away after a few days. So yeah, my leisure time has probably dropped like 95% during this past 7 or 8 months. So,
yeah.
I'll be happy. The good news is it's drawing to a close on my end, but it's more about setting gears in motion, and then whatever happens.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I got to know, during that leisure time that you had, what game were you playing? What's your relaxed game that you're going through?
Well, I usually there's no one game. There's so many games I'm interested in. The last one I remember trying, I plan to resume, is Beyond the Steel Sky. It was a sequel to Beneath the Steel Sky, made back in the 90s. And it's all right. It's not mind-blowing, but I was curious.
Yeah. You've got quite a few games you're interested in. I was showing him earlier today your big list of games on your website that's like 1 million pages long.
Yeah, though I still, it's not as delusional, the idea of me getting through those, as it might seem, because I've gotten a lot pickier. So I'll find that, if this game hasn't sold me in like 10, 20 minutes, or at least kind of made me wonder if it's worth going, I'll bail on it. And if I like the story, I might just, where it was going, I might just watch a playthrough and then move on. So I'm spoiled for choice, honestly. So.
Yeah, for sure.
It's quite a list too.
Yeah, that's like something I saw that and I was like, man, I should do that myself. It's just a good way to keep track of the stuff I want to go back to outside of my Steam wish list, but that can only be so comprehensive.
Yeah, on my home system, I have a program I use called Launchbox, which I use it to sort of archive all my games by screenshot. And then games that I've played, I can hide them. So then if I'm not sure what I've played or not, I can just watch this row of screenshots, and it always gets me kind of really fired up. This like, oh, this looks fun. Oh, this looks fun. So
yeah, that's sweet. Okay, well, so I mean, why don't we get into the Stop Killing Games stuff?
Actually, before we do that, I had just a pretty quick pre-interview question that I wanted to ask as a fan, as a longtime fan of your channel. Where are we at on that movie?
It's been completely stalled because of the campaign. The original plan was I would be neck deep in it right now, or maybe past a significant technical milestone where I keep working on the regular videos, but something huge has been cleared and things are working in the background. This campaign stalled all of it. So that's another reason I'm eager to like kind of wind things down on my end.
Yeah.
For the greater good. So the movie's on hold for the greater good of the industry.
Yeah, it will, better late than never is becoming like my life story here. So
Yeah. But it's still happening. It's still going to resume production at
yes,
some point.
it stalled, not canceled by any means. So.
Hell yeah. All right, cool. All right, now we can get into the interview.
Okay. Yeah, just to start off, I've kind of heard you talk about this in other interviews and stuff. But like where did the initiative start for you? I know you've sort of mentioned the crew a couple times, but was it more of a straw that broke the camel's back thing, or was it like, this is just a good opportunity to do this?
It was definitely, it's almost like, I was thinking of like a dam breaking, but not like a straw breaking camel's back, but more like, in games when you're just waiting to ambush somebody at one spot.
Yeah.
You might be there for a couple minutes and then they're like, okay, go. It was like that. Like I had been waiting for some opportunity to take action on this and nothing seemed quite right. And the crew was kind of like the planets aligning because it was a big game. So not the biggest, but big enough so that there were a lot of people who still had receipts for it. But the most important thing was it was published by Ubisoft, which is located in France, which means they're subject to all kinds of laws US companies aren't. So that made it just kind of the perfect target. It's a coincidence that I also like the game. I mean, I would have done this for any big game that hit all the criteria. But yeah, okay, I guess to run through it quick, I've been looking, part of the problem, I guess I should explain what this campaign is about. It's, we're trying to test the legality and if not change it, of the practice of companies selling you a game or licensing you a game for a one-time fee with no stated expiration date, and then just shutting it down later without telling you how long that's going to be, and then keeping your money. Because that is so kind of that's so consumer hostile that the legality of it is not clear in many countries. So that's been half the battle, is just get governments to take a look at this issue and decide if what's going on is legal or not. So that was the first sort of initiative, and well, not initiative, but that was the first plan. And the main goal of that was to get a lot of complaints sent to consumer protection agencies that might do something about this. That involved a lot of research. And while I was doing that research, I found out about the option for a European Citizens Initiative, which if you get 1 million signatures, that's the extremely iffy part in my eyes, then your proposal will go before the EU Commission and it might get made into law. Or at the very least, it's going to be taken seriously by the government, the EU Commission. So this is an offshoot of that because I originally launched this campaign kind of in April, but the Citizens Initiative took months longer to process. So that's why it opened up more recently.
So you would say that this initiative isn't actually the entire campaign. This is more of like an offshoot gambit, but it's not the centralized idea you've been doing.
Yeah, I call it the moonshot. This is one of the most powerful options, but it's also one of the most ambitious because 1 million signatures is no joke to get that many across the EU.
Yeah, and it's proportional too, right? Like there has to be there can only be a certain amount from each country. Like they have to hit a certain threshold in each country throughout the EU.
Limits. I mean, there needs to be at least 7 countries that meet a minimum.
Okay.
And then as long as you have that, all the votes can count. People can raise 5 times the number of signatures per country or whatever.
Okay.
So yeah, there are mandatory minimums. However, that's very unlikely to be an issue if the hard part is just the total.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I was curious how that worked because I actually thought it was every country had to like hit their threshold, and I was wondering like how are you going to hit these countries with these like small,
I would have to be just world citizen to try and pull something like that off.
Door to door in the EU, knocking on people's.
In different languages.
Yeah.
So while we're talking about this, just shot in the dark, pure speculation. What is it you think about Finland that made them like power through it so fast?
I have no idea. I guess they probably have more English speakers, or maybe. I mean, I have no insight as to why some countries might watch my videos or
That's why I
find
said,
out
like,
about more
shot in the
about
dark,
it.
because
But
Finland
for,
answered the call, man.
for sure, English speaking has to be part of it, because
Yeah, yeah, it's got
that's
to be, right?
that's honestly our biggest obstacle, is getting non-English speakers just even aware of this.
Yeah.
Like that's because I think for most, if you're just talking most people, I think they're just either not, they're going to be either indifferent to this or not care. Yeah, or not care. Now, if you're talking most gamers, I think that's going to be similar, or except the people who don't care, they'll probably will care, but it won't be until 10 or 15 years from now, once they realize all their favorite games are being trashed and deleted, essentially. But for people who just hear, who've been bothered by this at all, they're usually just right on board. So the hardest part is just making gamers, especially, just aware of this and who don't speak English.
Yeah.
Spreading the word.
That's a pretty big challenge to have to overcome.
Yeah, maybe before we move on and get into our other questions, we should probably maybe establish some other stuff. I saw a question in the chat. Somebody said, "Is this about live service games or all games in general?"
Well, it's mostly live service games, because when you talk about all games in general, the vast majority of games are kind of safe when you buy them. What I mean, you probably have, like, PlayStation 2 games or something lying around. You can still run those, or now maybe some old computer games don't work natively, but then you can get an emulator or a virtual machine and get it working that way. Or there's plenty of people still playing on old Nintendo games, Nintendo Entertainment System. So most games this doesn't even affect, because there is well, there are problems, but not like existential level problems. It's just kind of a hassle to run a lot of old games, not impossible.
Yeah.
The live service games, I mean, I guess it depends on how you define it. I usually think of that as games that you have to be online in order to play them. And yes, this 100% targets those. And we're not actually trying to change anything while the game is being supported. So this would affect nothing as the game's running. It's only once they've decided to shut it down that, if this passed, the company would have to implement some sort of end of life plan. And that can vary a lot depending on what kind of game it is and what the EU would say, that sort of thing. But that's the general theme here, is to just kind of mandate companies have an end of life plan rather than just pull the plug. That's it. All the money you spent on it's gone. You're left with nothing. So,
yeah.
I think that kind of segues into a little bit into our next question, which is okay. So for a second, let's just put aside what is realistic. Realistic, feasible, achievable. Let's just throw all that out the window. What in your mind would be the optimal outcome for this whole campaign for both developers and consumers?
I think, well, you might have to talk to more developers about that, but I would say an optimal result would be one where, like, this passes, so the end of life plans become mandatory. However, there is some flexibility. So if they don't provide an absolute working build, they're still releasing the server binaries, or in some cases, maybe even the server source code, to show that, like, there's an honest effort that, for technically savvy people, they have a reasonable chance of kind of repairing the game. Because I think a lot of these games, it would be like sharks to blood in the water for getting them working if they had the tools. So that would give them some flexibility on it. And one of the potential points of compromise, we don't know yet, but would be the possibility of grandfathering in existing games where, okay, if if this is just impossible for some studios to comply to with some of their existing games, then they get a free ride and can shut them down without penalty later on. But any new games going forth would have to comply. Although we kind of want to, we want to try to aim a little higher than that, because that's still going to sacrifice hundreds of games over time if we grandfather them in. Because I think for online only games, the numbers may have changed a little bit, but we looked at it a couple of years ago, and the amount that actually survive because the publisher did something, it's something like 2 to 3%. So we would want to get that number a lot higher, even without the grandfathering in.
But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the grandfathering is kind of like a concession if you have to, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Because they would still have options even if nothing got grandfathered in, because they could shut down the game before the law went into effect. Yeah, this would not be retroactive. The EU law doesn't work that way. Another option, let's see, might be to well, this is another big if. This is a whole other can of worms, but I'd say there's a high chance we won't be successful for literal subscription games, ones where you pay for 30 days, you pay for a year, and then your access ends until you renew it.
Like Final Fantasy and World of Warcraft.
Yeah, exactly. Because part of the reason there's so much potential here is because most of these games, you don't get the protections of goods or services. But with games like that, those pretty clearly sound like services, because you're told exactly how long it lasts. You pay your money, you get access. That's how services work. Whereas something like, you know, the Crew or the Division or something, you pay once for the game. You're not told how long it lasts, and then they shut it down later. So it's like, well, you don't get to keep it if it's a good, and if it's a service, you're not told how long it is. And if you try to apply that to other services, it'd be kind of ridiculous. Like if I sell you a warranty to like office furniture or something, but I don't tell you how long it is. It might be 3 months, it might be 5 years. I'm not going to tell you when I sell it, but you have a warranty. I mean, yeah, come on, you would get in trouble in other businesses doing something like that. So,
yeah.
But rolling back to that, it's possible they could switch to a subscription model and not violate something that way. Now that's less than ideal for that's kind of less than ideal for almost everyone. So, which I think the market would kind of contain the influence of that, because companies have tried having subscription models to individual games before, and what they found is that market's very small. Only the big old guard, like you mentioned, World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy, like these mainstays that have been around for a couple decades and have huge brand recognition, that sort of thing, are able to pull that off. Most games can't get away with it for very long. So that would be another option. And I guess the other thing to make it ideal for developers too would be to have like a lot of lead-in time. So yes, this is going to go into effect, but it might not be till 2028 or something. So you have time to prepare, and you know, years out, you know, this is going to be a requirement. And a bonus of that is that if it's going to be a known requirement, I think a lot of middleware would emerge to make this easier for developers, so that when they're developing their game, you can buy a package that makes it very simple to have an end-of-life build for your online-only game.
That's a good point. Yeah, I didn't even really think about that, but yeah, that would kind of create a new like market for that. So like to go back to the reaction, I think there's what, there's like 3 countries that have hit their threshold at this point. It's at like 27% signatures for the initiative. Is this more than what you expected at this point, a few weeks in, or is it less?
It's either about what I expected or more. Okay. But I expected there to be kind of a surge initially. I didn't know how much, and then it would fall off. And it's kind of following that pattern. And I have right now we're in a zone where if this continues, even at the reduced rate, then we've got this. But if it drops later, then we don't. So it's a big if. You know, it's kind of like an exponential curve that kind of drops off like slowly. Then,
Yeah.
but maybe we'll get lucky. You know.
Well, I mean, the other thing too is, I mean, the way I've been looking at it is, it's also you know, you have a year to get the signatures. There's probably also going to be some push to, like, if you don't get the signatures towards the end of that 52-week term, there's probably going to be a big push at the end as well, because there's some sort of, you know, we have to do this now kind of message to put out there a little bit, right?
Well, you're more optimistic than I am. You could be right, but I'm not counting on anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably good. So talking about games like The Crew, Destiny 2, stuff like that, do you have any examples of games that have done this well, that have ended support well?
Yeah. Well, I mean, recently there was Gran Turismo Sport, where that was another driving game, online only for the most part, and they decided they're done with it, so they removed the online only requirements. I heard it wasn't very good, but in terms of practice, I appreciate it. Marvel's Avengers was another one that had required online, then they patched out. Actually, for online multiplayer, the game Knockout City got shut down, and they modified it so that you could have local hosting. So you don't have to connect to the company servers, but if you have a couple friends who wanted to play it, you connect to their server, and then you can continue playing the game, which is how it's honestly how the majority of multiplayer games used to work a couple decades back, which ironically, you can still play multiplayer in all kinds of games from the late 90s and early 2000s, but then you can't from a lot of games 10 or 15 years ago. Even for MMOs, there have been a couple that have released like their server files, where there's one, Saga of Rhizome, and another one, Estonia, where these are just full MMO games, and they were able to put together an emulator for it to run on, you know, customer hardware.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually something worth mentioning, is probably a significant amount of these games, the servers are not designed for consumer hardware. So there's a couple options there. That's why I kind of mentioned that best effort possibility earlier, which I think would be best. Because one option would be if the developer just says, you know what, we don't want to, we're done working on this game. Just take the files and get out of here. They could release a server binary, or ideally server source code. If it was the source code, that could very likely be adopted by the community to work on customer systems also. But let's say they just had the server binary. So this only works for some custom shard somewhere that, you know, isn't a normal home computer or console. Well, then the community, if they wanted to, they could hook up their own custom hardware or rent one out from someplace else, you know, and get it to continue working that way. And that actually becomes much more relevant for things like console or mobile games, because the likelihood that those systems or devices can't run this, just physically can't run the server software, gets higher. But if they're releasing everything you need to run that server on some other platform, then all you need to do essentially is be able to tell the version that's on the console or the mobile device, here, point to this location instead of the one at the company.
Yeah.
And you can continue getting it working that way. So yeah, we're not trying to ask the impossible here. Like, you were talking about what's realistic. I mean, but like this, from a technical perspective, nothing we're asking for is unrealistic.
Yeah.
Now the more aggressively you wanted to change, like today, yeah, that can become near impossible for some games, or just a mountain of work that just wouldn't be worth it for most companies. But the farther we get out into the future, the less excuses there are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, even you explaining that, it just seems like that people maybe misunderstand that, like, the goal here is just to, like, as long as is feasibly possible, give people a way to run the games. Like, there's so many games out there right now with their multiplayer versions, or games that were, or online that fans have kept running after they've been shut down, and that responsibility has been put entirely on them. And I mean, do I have it wrong? But maybe this is a way to give not the total responsibility to the developers, but like, hey, give us a little bit of help here.
What we want is basically make it the way I would explain it is if somebody bought a game and they want to play it and they're willing to jump through some hoops, then there should be no excuse at all from the developer to prevent them from doing that, even once they've ended support.
Yeah.
You know, because like I mentioned, most games are like that. You know, if you, again, like a old console game, did that game stop working? I mean, maybe if it got left out in the rain or something, you know, as long as it's kept in good shape, the game can work. So we're trying to get that kind of standard. It does get more complicated for games like these. But then as long as they're releasing that software where there's a will, there's a way. But the way it is now, I mean, the only time this stuff gets reverse engineered without help, that tends to be the exception more than the rule. And it takes just rocket science level geniuses, usually years of working on it because they're obsessed with that one game to get it working. So it's not impossible, but this is not a reasonable standard by anyone.
Yeah.
For anyone. So
yeah, it's not something you should expect from the audience, you know.
And depending on the game, that might get shut down when they're trying to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, though to me that would of course be encompassed under this. That's less the issue because there's all kinds of abandonware out there or emulation where they don't want you doing it, but there's no practical way to do it aside from hunt down. Like sometimes these titles are rare and then it costs hundreds of dollars for that one game. Or it's not the permission that's the big problem. It's just how possible is this even to do it, you know?
Yeah. Another question that I had is like in terms of the goals, you know, looking at a larger view, do you just expect this to like naturally spread to other countries because of the precedent, or are there going to be like similar campaigns like this for different places?
It's this implies I have expectations of how this is going to go. We're trying our best to reach out to other places, but only speaking English definitely handicaps me on this. So it's kind of, you know, you hope somebody else watches this and then they tell another YouTuber about it and that sort of thing, and it can spread organically that way. But I've always viewed this as a long shot. I just can't predict if it's going to make it or not. I don't have enough information either way on it because a year is a long time, but at the same time, this is 1 million is a big number to clear.
A similar question in that same vein. Let's assume that it passed, right? Let's assume best case scenario, you got the initiative and some measures were actually implemented like we would hope would be the outcome. What do you think the odds, of course, obviously there's no way to know, but just speculative, pure speculation, what do you think the odds are that other countries might see those and pursue adaptation of those laws on their own?
I think it would be really high, except maybe China and Japan or South Korea if they had like some ones that were only released in those countries. Because the thing is, the EU is a huge market. So if most games are sold globally. So if they want to sell there, that's, you know, millions or for some companies, billions on the table. So they pretty much have to comply with some sort of end of life build for those games when they shut them down. And if they've already done the work, then it's not going to be much more effort to just roll it out globally, you know, and just move on. And we've already seen this happen actually with refunds on games, especially on Steam, where I think it was in 2014, Australia's Consumer Protection Agency sued Valve over not allowing refunds on Steam games. And Valve lost, so they implemented refunds and they did it globally. And then most companies kind of followed suit because they realized this was looking like a losing battle, and none of them wanted to lose out on the Australian market. That also brings up a very good point, is that especially if you're looking forward for, designing future games, this is not a huge cost for developers. Like I've compared it to like adding seatbelts to cars, as far as like the extra. It depends a lot on the game, but for sure, just about any game, it's going to be one element among hundreds in the game, because, in a game you need sound, you need the textures to look right, you need ragdolls or physics to work. This is just one more element on there, and depending on how you design it, I think it would barely slow a lot of developers down.
And a lot of times it can even be implemented later, like if they're gearing up to start prepping like a live service game, for instance, to be sunsetted, that could be something they look into then. It doesn't even need to be super costly up front.
It depends so much on the kind of game, because there's some games, even if they never plan for this, it might just take an afternoon of changes and then they have an end of life plan. Other games, no, you'd have to, like, if you wanted to run it like on like the consumer hardware, then you might be looking at months of effort. Or in some games, it might be legally impossible in the present day, because they could have had licenses with other companies to make their server software, and that company has permission to use the license, but they don't have permission to hand it out to everybody so they can run their own servers. So they could be in violation of existing contracts if they were to try something like that. Hence why we're trying to kind of like break the cycle here, so that can't be an excuse down the line,
How exactly does that work? Like if there's a game with licenses, how do they in their contract says it's only for a certain number of years? How does that work if they want to provide end of life service to that game?
Well, they just don't do any. Well, okay, there's kind of two big ones that I know of. One is, maybe there's not an end of duration, but it's only for their company, and they paid, let's say they paid a lot for it, like, $50,000 or something. But that's just for their company to host the server. So they can't give out that server software without violating that license, and there's no way they could afford that. There can be other things with licenses that have come up, where sometimes games will use name brands, for driving games, this happens a lot with cars, like Ferrari or Lamborghini, or several games will use like record label licensed music, that they only have permission to use that for 5 years or 10 years as part of their deal.
That
However,
Alpha Protocol.
What?
That happened to a game called Alpha Protocol. It kept it from being...
it's happened a lot. Like Alan Wake, Crazy Taxi, some of the Grand Theft Auto games. It's happened to several. But the way that usually works, at least every instance I've ever known of it, is what that means is once that license expires on their end, like so they no longer have permission to use Ferrari or something in their games, that means they have to stop selling it. That doesn't mean that anyone who bought it can't continue playing it, because that's happened with a lot of car games, like Project Cars, some of the Forza games, some of the Need for Speed ones, where, if you have a copy, you can still play that game, but that company is not allowed to sell it anymore unless they were to renew the license, and they probably think it's not worth it at that point to renew it.
Yeah, so in that case, the people that already purchased the game would have access to that end of life support, and then everybody else would be not able to obtain it.
That's how it would work, and that is less than ideal for preservation. But man, to go farther than that, you would have to upend so much copyright law, and we're not. Look, we're picking our battles on this. It's already enough of an uphill thing. We don't need to court the wrath of Disney or Amazon or I don't know who are the big hitters with copyright, but
that definitely gets into messy territory. One thing I wanted to ask you here too was just to like dispel some sort of things I've seen online, because I've seen this like kind of a lot online, is that like you're not out to kill live service games, right?
Not in the slightest. I mean, Yeah, in fact, some people were worried this would kill those kinds of games. And I made a video where I talked about that. I said, you know, again, the EU is a big market. The demand wouldn't have gone away. And again, they could keep doing whatever they wanted while the game was supported. So if they want to sell skins or loot boxes or DLC or just whatever, they could keep doing all of that. This wouldn't interfere with any of it. So these types of games would still be highly profitable. And we're just asking that at the end of it, once they're all done making money and they shut it down, that the people can continue playing it. I don't know if this is too idealistic to think this. I think there's a small chance it might actually increase sales a little bit, because then people like me would have a little more faith buying one of these games, knowing that, okay, well, I can play it now, I can play it later, but it's going to be safe either way. You know, I'm buying this game. I don't have to worry about when support ends. I can take it at my own pace. However, I don't know what percentage of players are like that. It could be pretty small. But,
yeah, but I mean, it's still a worthy cause too, right? You know, even if it's a small percentage of players, it's still.
Yeah, trying to kill any kind of games. We're trying to mandate end of life plans. That's the way to look at it.
And you know, something Son and I have actually talked about a couple of times is this. It's about video games, obviously, but realistically, this cause is more about art preservation, right? It's about the hundreds of hours people spent making models, making textures, designing environments. It's about preserving that. This isn't necessarily, oh, we want to, we like video games, which that's a factor, but this is very much so an art preservation conversation, which feels very worthy to me. I mean, we have a government funded company that focuses on preserving old films here in the US. I don't anyone who doesn't think that games are worth preserving just because they're games,
Yeah, speaking personally, that's 100% of where my motivation comes on this, because I just like good art, and that can include games. And when I see these destroyed, like I said in one of my videos, for me, it's the same as if you were to walk into a museum and set fire to one of the paintings. Because, I mean, yeah, some people aren't going to value video games as much, but they can at least understand all the art and music and every experience that goes into it. However, that's not really how we're pursuing this in terms of legal action, because there's not much there for art preservation. So while that's my personal motivation, almost all of our push is on consumer rights, because there is a lot there on consumer rights for all kinds of things that we can try to piggyback onto. So
if you,
it's both, honestly, yeah.
So if you tried to word it or go at it from specific art preservation laws, it just wouldn't work.
Probably not.
I mean, not impossible, but we would have to, I'd expect to win the lottery first.
Yeah. That's interesting. I don't know much about the legal end of things, so all of this has been really interesting to me.
I could see the art preservation argument maybe in a country like France, if it had been being pushed year after year, and then it was kind of entering the sort of zeitgeist that these data. But man, that feels a lot iffier than what we're doing, and just worse odds.
Do you think, hypothetically, right, the art preservation angle has a higher chance of success in the US than the consumer rights angle? US specifically, I feel like we would get more success pursuing the preservation angle than we would the consumer rights angle.
I honestly don't know, just because does the US have art preservation laws? I don't know.
Not really, but we do have a lot of government funded entities that pursue art preservation, film preservation of that.
Say no, because it would have to be voluntary. It have to be a voluntary effort on behalf of these companies to submit them to some sort of government agency. And among developers and publishers, there's not a lot in between. Either people are doing it the right way anyway, or they make an effort at the end because they care about their game that they spent years working on, and of course they want to be able to show it off to people, even once, or the ones that publishers especially that just don't care, and they're kind of creating the problem here.
Yeah.
So that they don't really have any incentive to do that. No, the U.S. we've looked into it. It's one of these things where it's technically not impossible, but I can't see it happening without just some multimillionaire getting involved with it. Like that's
Yeah.
and I don't make my plans around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think like to Evan, to what you were saying, I think the art preservation angle might be better for like public perception in the US, because I think a lot of people could get on board with something like that. But
Yeah,
I mean,
that makes sense.
that you got to look at the government as a thing,
Well, go ahead.
Oh no, you're good. Continue.
I was just gonna say you did mention art preservation being like kind of a big aspect of your personal motivation. This isn't really what you set out to do with your channel. This has never really been your intended content output. So, I mean, do you at all feel uncomfortable with the position you've been put in after this? Or this is just what you were doing because you felt you had to, because you felt was the right thing to do? Do you feel like you've been put in an uncomfortable
100%.
position?
I kept wishing somebody else bigger would step up on this, or I even said as much in multiple videos.
I remember that.
I think I would be better as just kind of a signal booster. Somebody else is doing that. Hey, everybody, go here. And just kind of be a cheerleader for it. I mean, as for comfortable, it's just. I mean, I would compare it to doing like a high-end school or college project that just doesn't end. It's. I mean, I've had to do a lot of like long projects I don't enjoy doing, but yeah, no, I don't really. I mean, yeah, it's nice talking to you guys, but I've talked about this topic a few times now. I would, like you mentioned earlier, I'd rather be working on my movie, which would be this own kind of creative thing that,
which I'm looking forward to.
And, yeah, putting that together, or just playing a game, rather than do. But it's something that. Yeah, I felt kind of compelled to, because it felt like nobody was going to step up on it. And I couldn't turn off that nagging doubt that I was seeing, well, with these other consumer protection agencies, this really does seem like it could be an opening. This doesn't seem completely locked down. Because if I thought this was hopeless, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not zealot that would just, do it no matter what the odds. I need to see a possible path to victory. And I guess, unfortunately for me, I was seeing a possible path to victory on this.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to give it my absolute best shot, however flawed it is. And just at the end of it, I'll know I did everything I could on it and just have no regrets.
Yeah.
So that's at least what I can do with that.
Well, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to ask, like, speaking to that point, with this sort of like whole thing, are you at all like disappointed with like some of the discourse around the initiative? It just seems like a lot of people are confused or maybe have bad information. Like it feels like sometimes there's two separate conversations happening when I see people debating about this online or talking about it and stuff.
Not really, but yeah, in order to be disappointed, you have to have your expectations at a certain place anyway. This has been an upstream battle just narratively for forever, because put it like this, if we have been able to, it's kind of a conundrum, because if we had been able to act on this 20 years ago, I do not think you would see this kind of split, because everybody would be used to their games lasting, and like, of course we should be able, but then there would be nothing to act on because the problem was so much lower then. Yeah, I think I've seen that over the years, where I think a lot of gamers even don't get it because they don't even understand what we're trying to do is possible. Like they just kind of think that, okay, of course the company hosts the game, and when it goes down, the game is unplayable. What are you trying to do? You're you're asking for like magic carpets or something here. Like they don't get it. They literally don't understand that, no, this is all a preventable decision here.
Yeah.
And it can be adapted to something that doesn't have to be like this. So that's part of it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe some of it's a certain amount of Stockholm syndrome where they like their game. You see this on all kinds of issues in gaming where they like their game. So anyone speaking ill of their game for any reason is the enemy. So they need to jump on that.
Yeah.
Even if it's a legitimate, you see that on all kinds of issues in gaming.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is some of that. They're saying, well, this game that I love, he's saying they need to change things and they're doing a bad job. Well, no, he's wrong, not the game. The game can't be wrong. I think there can be some of that. I think more so in America, I think, thankfully, there is a certain mentality of some people online where they see just any interference from the government being bad, just full stop, and like that's the end of the story for them. And I guess what I would say to them is, we're doing this as a last resort. We would I would have been thrilled to have the industry solve this themselves and realize, oh, whoops, we went a little too far, and then backed up, and that's not really a problem. But instead, it's the reverse. They're promising more and more of this sort of thing. So
they're telling you it'll be good for you.
Not too many of them, but it's maybe a few. I think most of them, the more adamant ones, are telling you that, well, this is what you agreed to in the license, so this is how it should be. It's more kind of appeal to authority kind of thing, that just because the license says this, therefore that's the law, and they don't understand that. No, that cannot overdo. That cannot supplant the law, especially in other countries, especially in European countries. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think you make a good point though with the, with sort of saying that, like the people that are talking about it just see negative attention towards their game, or their game is doing something wrong. That's why I think it's important that, like getting more people informed on this stuff as well, because I feel like I said, I feel like people are just confused. They just don't have the information, and they think it's something that it isn't. Is that something that you feel like you've been struggling with?
It's hard to say, because I may have a bias on this. I think a lot of that might be on the American side, or maybe Canadian, or whereas in Europe, I think there is a stronger sense of having consumer rights, so that you don't have to walk them down this long road to explain. They're like, oh yeah, you paid money for the game, you should keep it, of course. And then like I've seen a lot of, and part of what it reinforces this is sometimes I've seen news on this in foreign languages like German or French, and then I browsed through some of those comments and I hit the translate, and it seemed percentage-wise way more on board than in English. So it could be we're lucky in the sense the more Europeans kind of get it for consumer rights. Honestly, for a lot of goods and services, there really are more consumer rights in Europe on things. Like, for example, for many, many goods in Europe, if you order something and you try it out, but it's not what you wanted, and even if you've opened the packaging, as long as it's in basically new condition, you can send it back within 2 weeks and get your money back. Wow. And I can think of a lot of things in the U.S. in the past that would have liked something like that for. Yeah. But like I returned a monitor that had like dead pixels on it that wasn't necessarily covered by the warranty. It's like, okay, well, I opened it like I was a museum curator to make sure it was like really careful, and so I could put it back in the box nice and neatly. And so it feels like you just have to assume or like hope that the company has like a good policy, or that they're like nice, and like you'll get your money back here. It's it's not necessarily that way. It's a crapshoot. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, well, I guess the question I had was like, I guess if the discourse is bad in the US, like it doesn't really matter for you, right? Because those aren't the people that are signing this thing.
Mostly, but maybe Europeans find out about it through the bad discourse. It's hard to say,
That's true.
I mean, there's only so much I can do too, especially if like the people on the opposite end are a lot bigger than I am. I mean, that's why I released the frequently asked questions about it. I don't expect most people to watch it, but that way, if people are trying to figure out what this is about, that should kind of spell out almost everything on it.
Yeah.
There is a question that I wanted to ask, and we really don't want to spend very much time on this particular thing, but I feel like it'll be pertinent to address. Um, and I, just to have some final clarification on it. So everybody knows that Pirate Software has been your biggest critic, or arguably your biggest critic, and he's been very outspoken on a lot of things. But the only thing I really want to know is if for some reason he had a change of heart and offered to let you come on board and wanted to have a conversation with you, would you say yes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't expect to change his mind on a thing, but I could at least clarify it. Yeah, the thing that stood out to me with him was, I think he's taken the video down now where he said this, but when he first reacted to the video, what he said over and over when I was talking about it was, this is not a problem. So I'm saying the problem is the games are being destroyed, people pay money for. He is firmly in the camp, this is not a problem, this is as it should be. So that's a values clash. I mean, we just have different views on this. Mm-hmm. So I don't expect to change his mind on anything, but he has misunderstood a lot. I guess what I'd say is he has misunderstood a lot of what we're doing, but I also think it doesn't matter from his end. I think he seems to hate it either way. So
yeah.
For what it's worth, we are, here. If you get lost in the weeds on any of this, for me, speaking for myself personally, I am in favor of any solution that solves this problem. So if you're a developer and think we're going too far, and you're thinking, well, yeah, this is good, but we really need a longer, like, grandfathering period or something like that. Look, that's a productive conversation, in my opinion, but because then we're just trying to figure out what works best for everybody. But, you know, if you're just against this full stop, it's like, well, then we just got to get more people who are for it than against it.
Yeah, that's like a fundamental difference of opinion, so you can't really move past that at all.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you have to go with democracy then, just see whose voice is bigger on it, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a strong tendency, especially on the internet and with Twitter. Even myself kind of fell into it at the start of it, for people to get caught up in like the drama aspect of it. So the only reason I asked is just, for finalization and like good faith. If for some reason he kind of came around and wanted to talk to you, you were happy and willing to have that conversation on your end. That's all I wanted, No drama.
I don't know about happy, but I would do it to be polite.
Really?
I'm going on to somebody's channel who hates everything about what I'm trying to do, so it's probably not going to be the most fun time. Yeah. But yes, do that and try to address any points he had. But however, I will say, he said repeatedly also that he doesn't want to talk to me. So I figure, unless that's changed, I don't see the point in bothering him about it either.
Of course, we don't want to harass anybody. No bothering them.
Don't feel obligated. Anybody who's watching this to like harass him to talk to me about.
That's a dead end.
Yeah, and that's what I would much rather you reach out to some, Spanish or German YouTube channel that has like 500 viewers or something, because who knows where that spreads to.
Yeah, I was mainly asking just from a good faith perspective, like no ill will or anything.
No ill will towards him. Yes, I'll go with that. But
I like that. Yeah.
You've said a couple times that you're like you didn't have any expectations on this. Do you mean that your expectations were low, or you were just like, I literally don't know what's gonna happen?
I guess I had some. Like, I expected there'd be a surge.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would have been surprised if we couldn't have broken 50,000 signatures within like the first week or so. But it's once it's like, for example, right now it's hovering at a level that if it stays there, we're set. I have no idea how long that level lasts. Maybe it just keeps going in several months and awesome. Or maybe tomorrow it drops down significantly. I'm not good at gauging this. I've never run a campaign before. So this is all kind of uncharted territory for me also.
So something that's interested me is like, this might be like a little bit too in the weeds for some people, but like, how did you even get started on this? I'm sure there's a lot of conversations with like people who know about law, doing your own research, like I don't even know, like how did you even get started? Like what are the complexities of this kind of scale of a thing?
Well, I guess depends how far back you want to start. I mean, I've been making videos trying to point out the issue, hoping it would stick with someone, and it didn't really, or at least, well, obviously a lot of people feel the same way we do on it. It's just that they don't have any sort of access or influence to be able to do something about it. For this campaign, again, I recognize, yeah, they announced the crew was shutting down in December, and I've been kind of waiting, particularly for Ubisoft, because they were located in France. And honestly, if I could have picked any country to have this battle in, it would have been France. So that's just dumb luck on our part. And then it hit me, they're like, wait, yeah, we really might be able to do something on this. So my early video, I think back in January, was saying, I'm going to do something. I don't know what. And, feel free to suggest help. And I put my email up, and I mentioned that, maybe you don't know anything about how to help in the US, but you do know something about Germany or France or Finland, and I got a wave of responses. I went through a lot of that and was able to kind of research more about what our possibilities were with a consumer protection agency. And then I did another video trying to narrow it down a little bit more. I got a lot more feedback from that. And from there, it kind of led to some volunteers kind of continuously helping in various countries. And we managed to kind of cobble together a plan on it. So it's very kind of just try your best to figure it out and just reach out to the crowds kind of thing. So.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that's awesome. I can't, like you said before, you wished that you were just kind of like a signal person on this. I thank you for being the one so that we can just be signal people on this.
Yeah, you really bit the bullet.
Which, honestly, I wish this was never even an issue in the first place, and we had sane laws on this to begin with.
Yeah.
That ship sailed. So.
Oh yeah, it's far gone. Another question that I wanted to ask was maybe getting a little bit further away from the Stop Killing Games thing was like, this is like obviously your biggest issue with the games industry right now, but do you have any other like issues with the game industry, like big things that maybe people don't talk about as much or people aren't as worried about?
Well, I mean, there's dozens of like tiny ones, tiny for me, obviously it can be a bigger deal for other, like for example, I'm not a gambling addict, but if I was, I could see where the predatory monetization could be a real problem.
Yeah.
Because you just want to play a game and then, it's triggering your gambling addiction. I'd say for me personally, my number 2 issue, which I have no intention of launching a campaign on, would be games that are, you can play them now, but as time goes on, it's going to get harder and harder. Like I'm thinking of stuff like console games where that have never been emulated and they've been discontinued. So there's still plenty of consoles out there, the games are out there, but as time goes on, 10 years, 20 years, they could be harder and harder to kind of play those games. And it'd be really great to have some options for emulation for that, because I think on a long enough time scale, emulation becomes your only option for preservation, or on some level, because eventually the forces of time catch up to the medium. Some are a lot more robust than others, but like even on cartridges, the little transistors might oxidize or something, or well, even back in the day for like real old games in the 80s, floppy disk went bad all the time. It was just even back then, So.
Yeah.
Or actually, I had a DVD I bought. It was for a movie, for Saving Private Ryan back in the 2000s, and the store-bought DVD I guess it oxidized or something. It rotted from the inside, like inside the plastic.
Really?
So,
damn.
Yeah, some discs can just corrode. over time. I mean, it might take it 20 years, but so, it's kind of like a moving train that once you have emulation, that just, it's in such a safer place, I think, than when it has to rely on the physical hardware. And, some people really care about like as authentic as possible. And they want all the exact hardware. It's like, well, great. They can hunt down the really hard to find and expensive stuff. Then everybody else who just wants to play the game, can have the emulated experience. Again, I think we're in a period of time where it's not a huge deal, where all these older machines, like Commodore or Atari, Nintendo, stuff like that, they're all pretty safely emulated, and preservation has been excellent from an underground perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at something like, what is it? Well, I guess PlayStation 3 is having some, like PlayStation 4. Like, let's say you went 20 years. Do we have an emulator for that? Maybe we do. Maybe we don't.
Yeah.
Actually, I think the original Xbox might still be a little rocky with emulation.
It is very rocky. I've been messing with emulating stuff on the original Xbox. For some reason, the original Xbox emulation is struggling. Like, it's easy. The 360 emulator actually is more stable. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
So it's cases like that I think would be like my number 2 issue, because again, I don't like seeing this stuff. I mean, this wouldn't be purposefully destroyed. It would just be kind of lost.
It just faded. Even in that case, there's some instances where I wonder if emulation is enough. So there's actually a game that I've been looking into playing. It was on the 360, the PS3, and the PC, called Syndicate. But you can find ROMs and emulate it for the PS3 and 360.
I have a copy of the PC version. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I was gonna say. You can't get it. I've been trying to get a copy of the PC version, and you can't get it. And I want the PC version because the console versions, first off, are saturated in post-processing effects to the point where it's almost, you can't even look at it. And the PC version, you can actually alter that, and it makes it much better. So the optimal way to experience the game, there's nowhere that you can buy a PC copy. It's not for sale.
Yeah. See, I have the advantage of having been around a while, so I was able to kind of swoop in when it was being sold. But yeah, a lot of younger gamers aren't. This was gone before they even had a chance.
Yeah.
So, but again, well, there's kind of 2 sides of this. If you want to do it like above board, you would need just so much changed on copyright law. I don't know if it'll ever happen. But on the other side, you can have stuff like abandonware, where the way, to be clear, abandonware is not a legal term. At least I'm thinking more of the United States here now. Technically, all abandonware is illegal and you can't run it. Mm-hmm. Now, realistically, what tends to happen is these sites tend to just put these old games that most people don't care about up there. And then if they get a cease and desist from the rights holder, then they take it down. But most of them just stay up there because either the rights holders don't care, or else they don't even know that they own it sometimes. Like sometimes.
Ironically, a good example of that is, we were talking about Syndicate. The same developer, Starbreeze, developed the Chronicles of Riddick games, and those are abandonware, and they're super, super easy to get a PC copy of them. And I think it's because whoever owns the IP doesn't even know that they own it.
Or
I really think that's it.
Like, even if they do own it, they might see it as like, well, we got our sales for it. We don't want to support it anymore. Whatever. I mean, it varies a lot on the company culture. Like, I think EA put out Syndicate.
Yeah, that's why you can't get it.
EA has a long history of just not caring. Yep. Like, either way, they don't care when they don't care when the game comes down. They don't care usually when it comes back up. Anyway, like, it's just. They have a long history of just not caring either way. So
I do see. I agree with that issue though. It is big because right now it's just sort of like we're just hoping that the right people and the passionate people sort of make these things preserved for time. I mean, the PS3 is even a great example of this, where it's like that's been such a rocky, weird emulation track for so long that it's still even weird and difficult to emulate some of those games on there. So it's just like trusting in the community. They're very similar sort of issues from like a wide perspective, but once you get into legal, it's probably very different.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little less worried about because the underground has kind of kept the torch burning incredibly well for lots of games. It almost reminds me of like in the Dark Ages, literature surviving because monks were hiding it away in the chapels or something.
The modern monks.
Yeah, they're keeping these books like hidden away and safe from all these raids. And things like
yeah. One question I was curious about was that like obviously your channel is focused on a lot more older games or like obscure games. Do you have any games that are like newer that have come out that you really enjoy?
Oh, well, probably, but I haven't played them yet. I tend to have kind of a lag time. Like I feel like the industry has practically trained me to wait on games because they usually go down in price and then they usually get patched a lot more. So you're having, I mean, a much better experience, at least for single player stuff, than somebody who just rushed out, bought it day one.
Yep.
Now, for multiplayer, that could be a different story because then you're getting your peak numbers towards the beginning and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I just keep lists. I don't know how many years behind. I'm usually about 2 years behind at any given time. Like, and it can go a lot higher than that because I'm not particularly picky what year a game was released. I don't mind old graphics or stuff. So I just kind of gravitate more towards what I might be in the mood for. Like maybe I want a strategy game or maybe I want a first person shooter and I'll see like what's available, what themes there are.
Check the list.
Yeah, check the list. Exactly. And I tend to do, look, I'll be frank, I'm a cheapskate when it comes to games. Like I tend to do all my game buying during major sales. And even then ones that are usually out a couple years. So I'm buying games for like $1.50 to $4 or $5 that retailed at 60, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of a bottom feeder in that sense, but.
You know, while the conversation has kind of shifted into, I guess, a more relaxed thing about a little bit less about the Stop Killing Games campaign, let's talk a little bit about your origin story, Freeman's Mind.
I'll be right back.
So where did that come from? Where did Freeman's Mind come from?
Well, before Freeman's Mind, I was, and a little bit during it, I was making a machinima series called Civil Protection.
Yeah,
which the way that worked was I took the Half-Life 2 engine and kind of edited in my own characters and maps and kind of 3D animated everything. And I really liked how it came out, but I'm convinced that you basically have to have obsessive compulsive disorder in order to enjoy animating, which I do not. So I was becoming really frustrated with how long it would take me to animate everything. And Freeman's Mind was just an experiment idea I had where I figured, okay, well, a lot of my viewer base are Half-Life fans because that's what these other videos were in.
A lot of source
Gordon
stuff.
Freeman's one of the most famous game silent protagonists. And I figured, well, I don't know. Maybe let's just try to make him as interesting as possible and see if I can just kind of go through this and it's turned out to be probably the most popular thing I'll ever do, just by accident. It's just
Were
kind
you
of
caught off guard by that?
I was surprised. Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a runaway experiment, is the way I look at it.
So this actually leads into what some people might find really interesting. If my Ross lore is up to date, you ended up getting like a contract with Machinima where you like worked in an office or something like that, and it was like really not good. Is that right?
Yeah, well, there was a lot to that. The short version is back in, I want to say, yeah, 2007, before you could monetize YouTube channels, you had to be basically a big company to do something like that. They were offering contracts to have the videos appear on their channel. So I originally just did these videos as just a hobby. I never intended to make any money from it. So I thought, sure, I can try that. And that worked out all right for a while. And then they tried a few times to just hire me outright and have me move to Los Angeles, which I was never had interest in because I don't know. I grew up in a place with like forested mountains, you know, so I kind of like that environment. As opposed to just kind of what feels like wasteland to me in LA. But like they came at me once, but then the pay they offered was so low the first time that I just had to pass because I didn't think I'd be able to survive. Then like a year later, they came at me again, and the reason I took it was I thought that they kind of pitched it that they had more resources as a studio, so I could really try to do some of my more ambitious ideas I could get some help with. So I figured, well, okay, even if I'm not making much money, the possibility to do things like I want to do with my movie or like longer shirts, that might be worth it because then I could really do more ambitious stuff that I like to do. It ended up being like a clown show where I forget the number now, but I want to say they were in a real rush to get me out there. Like they didn't want me to like drive out there with like a moving van. They wanted to fly me over and pay to have someone move the stuff. Okay. Like, and then once I get there, they didn't have a computer for me to work on, which I needed to do to animate. It was at least 5 weeks, but it might have been 9. I can't remember. So I kept coming in there and they're saying, like, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll try to get on that, getting you a computer. And they just didn't have anything. It was like
why
something
fly you out?
Yeah, exactly. Why fly me out if I could have brought my computer then, you know? So anyway, it wasn't beneficial at all. In fact, they didn't even have like a good place to record for it. So what I ended up doing eventually was getting like this kind of cheap netbook at the time. And I would come in after the hours were done at the place because there was too much background chatter and I had to get loud for the videos and would just record it there basically in the middle of the night in their building and then I would take the bus both ways coming there and back and it just wasn't good. But so I quit after, I think it was about 6 months of that and they put me on a reduced rate from my old one, but I figured, okay, well, it's still worth it just to get out from this. And I got a protection through sheer dumb luck. I added a protection that if they stopped paying me, the rights would return to me, and they were okay with that. And then lo and behold, years later, they came at me saying they were going to stop accepting all my videos unless I agreed to a new contract. But then they took months to get me a new contract.
Jeez. So
they just had me in a stranglehold where I couldn't release the videos. And I thought the terms were going to be really negative, and they were. And I was negotiating back and forth for months on it, like over email. And then people who were talking to me left, and then a new person would come in. And then they made these promises of things they would have, and then they finally showed me the contract months later, after I'm having all this stress as to I don't know if I'm going to be able to make more videos or not and they just completely ignored every provision. So I rejected it, and during that time, I discovered just through dumb luck they hadn't paid me for a couple videos. So that means it triggered my old contract, except they lost their copy of that contract, and I ended up getting like some sort of amateur pro bono legal help. I think it was just from a law student to help me. And basically we made kind of like a semi-credible threat that like, you know, if you weren't going to resolve this, we're going to sue after like 30 days because I mean, it's not like I had money to do that, but my back was completely against the wall because I couldn't just leave them and make new videos because that was locked under the contract, but they weren't accepting new videos. So they were just kind of like trying to like snuff it all out. But once I, you know, sent like a professional, like 15-page legal letter, first class, everything to their law department, they kind of rapidly had negotiations and I got out free from them. So that
damn. Makes you wonder how many people got completely screwed by that company.
A lot. I would guess hundreds to varying degrees.
I've heard nothing but like horror stories coming out of that stuff anyways. But real quick, thank you, Kevin, for the 20 bones. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words. Appreciate your super chats.
Yeah. So thank you, viewers, and all your super chats and support. We appreciate you. But thinking about Freeman's Mind, was any of Freeman's Mind done under those conditions at Machinima? And can you kind of remember which episodes? Like,
Oh yeah, it was. I don't know. I have to look back to get the exact numbers. It was kind of like started, I think, in the early teen number of the episodes and went and so probably went like 10 of them. Like the ones where you hear more echo on them. Yeah, those are definitely it. Around that range. So.
Can you remember any interest? Like, do you remember any interesting series or people that you were like associated, or at least like walked by in the offices back then?
There were people working nearby me. In fact, I kind of kicking myself that when Machinima took down all its videos, I didn't back up some of them. There was one called it was done in The Sims. It was called The Goddamn Fishing Show. And it was fun. It was like this guy going through his day, and he was saying like, "Yeah, I'm leaving my house and going out to my car here. It's named Beastmaster, and I'm heading out." Like, it was just kind of there. I think they, geez, oh man, I'm forgetting too many names. I'd recognize them immediately. There was fun spoofs. Was it Adam Kovic?
Yeah,
I think his last name is Kovic.
Yeah, Adam Kovic.
Yeah, he had a lot of funny stuff that he was recording for. I forget the name of the series, but he had good stuff going on. The person next to me was doing something called. It was some game history show. I forgot the name of it, but it was done pretty well. I'm trying to. Yeah, in fact, I think at one point I overheard him and I had to correct him on something because he was saying Resident Evil was the first survival horror game. I was thinking, wait a minute, you really want to say that in the video? I mean, like, it's not. I mean, because I'm not sure what the first one was, but I mean, it was heavily inspired by Alone in the Dark. I know that much.
Yeah. Resident fact checker at the offices.
I think there was like some mix up because it might have been the first game to call itself survival horror.
Man, what a time that was, and back in with Machinima videos and all of that.
Well, what were those? Those were called like MCMs. Is that what they were called?
Yeah, well, I don't know what they stand for. Multi-channel networks.
Yeah, MCN or whatever. Yeah, that was a wild. It is weird though. You saying like you wished you backed up some of those videos. Like I feel like OG YouTube videos. Like I just remember them so much more. Like you can quote them so much more than anything you've watched today. Probably just because there's like such a slew of content. But all those videos from back in the day.
There is good stuff out there, but it's like you got to hunt for it more.
Yes.
The way so it's just more everything.
I forget who owns Machinima now. It's some big company. I think like Sony or something. Some big company like straight up bought it and just shut it down and now just owns the concept of Machinima. I don't remember who it is.
It's like Warner Brothers or something.
Oh, that it might be.
Yeah.
See if I can Google that. See if I can figure out who owns Machinima. Warner Media.
Yeah, Warner Brothers.
That makes sense.
Evan, you had a question you wanted to ask here at the end.
Yeah. So currently, obviously, with the campaign and everything, Freeman's Mind 2, big halt, right? Understandably. But I think a question, you may have answered this already, but are you hypothetically, optimistically planning to go through episode 1 and 2 with Freeman's Mind 2?
I think I have to. I mean, I almost feel like I kind of, got conscripted by starting 2. So
yeah,
let me get through 2 first.
I know there was a huge gap between the end of Freeman's Mind and then starting Freeman's Mind 2. Was there a lot of like back and forth on your part about whether or not you actually really wanted to do a sequel series?
Yeah, I'm a little more conflicted now. It's not that I dislike it. It's just that I have other projects I'd rather do more is the problem. Like, so it's not like it's torture doing it, but I'm thinking, I mentioned the movie earlier. Or the game. Actually, now I'm getting cross incentives because one of the other shows I do, Ross's Game Dungeon, that does better now than Freeman's Mind. So, and that one's kind of more fun to make, though it can be more work. So it's kind of a mix now. Because I have to keep doing something just to keep my channel afloat. But what I really want to do is like make the movie, which will not have any return on money put into it. I don't anticipate, but it'll just be me trying to make the best video I can, sort of thing.
What about civil protection? Is that resolved and wrapped up now?
Not necessarily, but it's more like that's completely on hold until I make the movie, because civil protection, it falls under that, full animation pack thing where, you're making your kind of sets and your animation. So if I'm going to put that kind of work into it, I want to just make the absolute best thing I can with the movie. And then I'll just have to see how I feel after that. Actually, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. And I know a lot of people don't like it for art, and that's very understandable. But with AI, that might help a lot with the animation, where as long as it passes my own personal quality control, like if I need to show some guy like chopping wood or something, and I can't tell that this is an AI that did this as opposed to hand animated, yeah, I'm going to do that. I hate animating. So even then, I want to have even without that, I was planning to have as much motion capture as possible. So if the tools make it a lot easier, the movie could prime me for more civil protection. So.
Yeah, okay. That could be cool. And I imagine Freeman's mind too is going to end in that kind of content from you is probably going to be done. The narrate voiceover gameplay thing.
Yeah, that the Freeman's mind too is going to be the end of it either way. So for Freeman's mind, I'd rather have, I like having characters and like stories and that sort of thing and situations, because you're kind of on like a railroad track following Half-Life. You can't really deviate from that,
But I imagine we're getting plenty more Ross's Game Dungeon in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I have no plans of ending that anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's all of our major questions, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Do you want to wrap up this special broadcast?
I would just say, for the Stop Killing Games, we have a website, stopkillinggames.com, that can...
It is in the description.
Citizen, you can go there. It has guide. You probably won't even need the guides, but they're there if you need it. The site's multilingual. Try to spread the words, especially to anyone who might not speak English or...
Yeah. You have that FAQ on your channel as well. I wanted to direct people to that. Ross's channel is in the link in the description. There's an FAQ video there that, like I told you before we started, like I was on the fence last time we talked about this, and then I watched that video, totally washed any concerns I had away. And my concerns were all just from the perspective of somebody that was just kind of confused and had questions, and that video answered a lot of them. So if you have questions, go check that video out for sure.
Oh yeah.
Do you have like a Ross's Game Dungeon coming out soon-ish?
Yeah, that's what I've been working on. I think ideally it'd be Monday, but it could be later. So that's what I'm aiming for at the moment.
Monday would be cool. Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready for some more Game Dungeon.
It's no promises though.
Yeah.
But I'm close enough. I can give a date that I might miss. So that's better than having no idea. So
yeah. Evan, do you want to plug?
Yeah. So nothing releasing anytime super soon, but my retrospective on Perfect Dark Zero should be coming out this coming Friday. So a week from today at around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard. So if you guys are interested in catching up on Perfect Dark and where that's been going before the reboot, definitely swing by and watch that video a week from today.
Awesome. And I have a video coming out Sunday on Metal Gear Solid 4. My favorite Metal Gear Solid game. So check that out. If you want early access, it's on the Patreon right now. And be back here next week for another episode of TGG Plus. I want to thank you again, Ross, for coming here, hanging out with us, talking to us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me get the word out on it.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely a pleasure.
All right. We will see you next week.